The Summer Paralympic Games, or the Games of the Paralympiad, are an international multi-sport event, where athletes with physical disabilities compete. This includes athletes with mobility disabilities, amputations, blindness, and cerebral palsy. The Paralympic Games are held every 4 years, organized by the International Paralympic Committee. Medals are awarded in each event, with gold medals for first place, silver for second and bronze for third. A tradition at the Olympic Games started in 1904. The United States and the United Kingdom have each hosted 2 Summer Paralympic Games, more than any other nation. Other countries that have hosted the Summer Paralympics are Australia, Canada, China, Greece, Israel, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, South Korea, Spain and West Germany. In the 2016 Summer Paralympics, Brazil will host the first Summer Games in South America in Rio de Janeiro. Tokyo will be the first city to host the Summer Paralympics more than once. 1964 and 2020. 12 countries: Argentina, Australia, Austria, Belgium, France, Great Britain, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Netherlands, Switzerland, United States, have been represented at all Summer Paralympic Games. 7 of those countries have won at least one gold medal at every Summer Paralympic Games: Australia, Austria, France, Great Britain, Italy, Netherlands, and the United States. The United States have been the top-ranking nation for 8 of the 13 Paralympic Summer Games. 1964, 1968, 1976, 1980, 1984, 1988, 1992 and 1996. China have been the top-ranking nation for the 3 most recent games, 2004, 2008 and 2012. Italy, West Germany and Australia have been the top-ranking nation 1 time each. Qualification. Qualification rules for each of the Paralympic sports are set by the international federation that governs that sport's international competition. History. The first official Paralympic Games was held in Rome in 1960. 400 athletes from 23 countries competed at the 1960 Games, though only athletes in wheelchairs competed. At the 1976 Summer Games, athletes with different disabilities were included for the first time at a Summer Paralympics. With the inclusion of more disability classifications, the 1976 Summer Games expanded to 1,600 athletes from 40 countries. The 1988 Summer Paralympics were the first to use the same facilities as the Olympics of that year. London, United Kingdom held the 2012 Summer Paralympics. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil will be the host city of the 2016 Summer Paralympics, becoming the first Latin American and South American city to host either the Summer or Winter Games. Classification. Within the 6 disability categories, the athletes still need to be divided according to their level of impairment. The classification systems differ from sport to sport, and is intended to even the playing field so as to allow as many athletes to participate as possible. Classifications vary in accordance with the different skills required to perform the sport. Archery. Archery is open to athletes with a physical disability. Classifications are broken up into 3 divisions. W1, spinal cord injured and cerebral palsy athletes with impairment in all 4 limbs. W2, wheelchair users with full arm function. W3, standing amputee, lesorters and cerebral palsy standing athletes. Some athletes in the standing group will sit on a high stool for support but will still have their feet touching the ground. Athletics. Athletics is open to all disability groups and uses a functional classification system. A brief classification guide is as follows. Prefixing F for field athletes or T for track athletes. F or T 11 to 13 are visually impaired, F or T 20 are learning disabled, F or T 32 to 38 are cerebral palsy, F or T 40 to 46 amputee and lesorters. T51 to 54 wheelchair track athletes and F51 to 58 wheelchair field athletes. Basketball. Basketball is open to wheelchair athletes. Wheelchair athletes are classified according to their physical ability and are given the points rating between 0.5–4.5. The individuals who rate at 0.5 are the most severely disabled and those at 4.5 are the least disabled. A team on the court comprises 5 players and may not exceed a total of 14 points at any given time. Boccia is open to athletes with cerebral palsy or related neurological conditions who compete from a wheelchair. Classifications are split into 4 groups. BC1. Athletes are either throwers or foot players. Athletes may compete with an assistant. BC2. For throwing players, players may not have an assistant. BC3. Athletes who use an assistive device and may be assisted by a person, but this assistant must keep their back to the court. BC4. For throwing players, players may not have an assistant. Cycling. Cycling is open to amputee, les autres, cerebral palsy and visually impaired athletes who compete in individual road race and track events. Classifications are broken up into Divisions 2, 3 and 4. Athletes in Division 2 are the most severely disabled, while athletes in Division 4 are considered to be higher functioning. Visually impaired athletes compete together with no separate classification system. They ride in tandem with a sighted guide. Amputee, spinal cord injury and les autres competitors compete within the classification groupings LC1 for riders with upper limb disabilities, LC2 for riders with disabilities in one leg but who are able to pedal normally, LC3 essentially for riders with a handicap in one lower limb who will usually pedal with one leg only, and LC4 for riders with disabilities affecting both legs. Equestrian. Equestrian is open to all disability groups, with riders divided into 4 grades. Grade 1 incorporates severely disabled riders with cerebral palsy, les autres and spinal cord injury. Grade 2 incorporates cerebral palsy, les autres, spinal cord injury and amputee riders with reasonable balance and abdominal control. Grade 3 is for cerebral palsy, les autres, amputee, spinal cord injury and totally blind athletes with good balance, leg movement and coordination. Grade 4 incorporates athletes who have cerebral palsy, les autres, amputation, spinal cord injury or are visually impaired. This last group comprises ambulant athletes with either impaired vision or impaired arm, leg function. Fencing. Fencing is open to wheelchair athletes. There are only 3 classes. Class A incorporates those athletes with good balance and recovery and full trunk movement. Class B is for those with poor balance and recovery but full use of one or both upper limbs. Class C is for athletes with severe physical impairment in all 4 limbs. Football. There are 2 forms of football played at the Paralympics. The first is 5-a-side football, which is open to visually impaired athletes. The second is 7-a-side football, which is open to athletes with cerebral palsy. 5-a-side football is open to all visually impaired athletes. Since there are different levels of visual impairment, all players except the goalie are required to wear eye shades. The field dimensions are smaller than able-bodied football. There are only 5 players on the pitch and the ball makes a sound. Otherwise the rules are exactly the same as able-bodied football. Athletes competing in 7-a-side football are broken down into classes 5, 6, 7 and 8. All classes comprise ambulant athletes, Class 5 being the least physically able, progressing through to Class 8 who are minimally affected. Teams must include at least 1 athlete from either Class 5 or 6. Furthermore, no more than 3 players from Class 8 are allowed to play at the same time. Other than the fact that the game is played with 7 players, the rest of the rules and dimensions of the playing field are the same as able-bodied football. Goalball. Goalball is open to visually impaired athletes who must wear blackout masks to ensure all participants can compete equally. therefore eliminating the need for classification. The ball has a bell in it to help the players react to the ball. Complete silence at the venue is required so that the athletes can orient themselves and to ensure fairness. Judo. Judo is open to visually impaired athletes. The rules are the same as able-bodied judo except that the players are allowed contact with their opponent prior to the start of the match. There are no classifications. Participants are divided into weight categories in the same way as able-bodied judo athletes. Powerlifting. Powerlifting is open to athletes with cerebral palsy, spinal cord injuries, amputations, and les ortas. Since the competition is a test of upper body strength, the classifications are by weight category as in able-bodied powerlifting competition. Sailing. Sailing is open to amputee, cerebral palsy, visually impaired, spinal cord injured and les ortas athletes. There are 3 events, one for single, double, and triple crew boats. Classification for sailing in the 3-person event is based on a functional points system with low points for severely disabled athletes rising by scale to high points for less disabled athletes. A classification committee evaluates each sailor and assign a point from 1 to 7 based on their level of ability. Each crew of 3 is allowed a maximum of 14 points. The single-person event can be crewed regardless of points, but the sailor must have at least a minimum level of disability which prevents them from competing on equal terms with able-bodied sailors. The 2-person event is designed for more severely disabled athletes. Shooting. Shooting is open to athletes with a physical disability. There are only 2 classes of competition, wheelchair and standing. There are 2 types of events, pistol and rifle. The athletes are broken down into classes based on their upper body functionality, balance, muscle strength and limb mobility. The 3 classes are SH1 competitors do not require a shooting stand. SH2 competitors cannot support the weight of the gun and require a shooting stand, and SH3 rifle competitors with a visual impairment. Swimming. The Paralympic swimming competition features all 4 of the strokes used in able-bodied swimming competitions. Classification is divided into 3 groups. S1 to S10 are those with physical impairment. S1 will have the most severe impairment and an S10 a lesser impairment. Athletes are judged on their muscle strength, joint range of motion, limb length and movement coordination. S11 to S13 are those with a visual impairment. S11 will have little or no vision. S12 can recognize the shape of a hand and have some ability to see. S13 greater vision than the other 2 classes but less than 20 degrees of vision. S14 is for athletes with a learning difficulty. Table tennis. Table tennis is open to athletes with a physical disability. There are individual, doubles and team events. A match is 5 sets of 11 points each. The athletes are broken down into 10 divisions based on their level of function. Classes 1 to 5 are for athletes competing from a wheelchair, with Class 1 being the most severely disabled and Class 5 the least disabled. Classes 6 to 10 encompass ambulant athletes, with Class 6 the most severely disabled and Class 10 the least. Tennis. Tennis at the Paralympics is played with all the same rules as able-bodied tennis, with the exception that the ball is allowed to bounce twice, and the first bounce must be within the bounds of the court. It is open to athletes with a mobility-related disability, which means that they cannot compete on equal terms with able-bodied tennis players. The game is played from a wheelchair, with 2 classes, paraplegic and quadriplegic. Volleyball. Volleyball is open to athletes with a physical disability and is performed from a seated position. In sitting volleyball, the court is smaller than the standard court and has a lower net. In the sitting games, the only classification rule is that each team may have only 1 player who fits the minimum disability rule, which is that their disability prevents them from competing on equal terms with able-bodied athletes. The other players on the team must demonstrate a higher level of disability. Wheelchair rugby. Athletes are classified on a points system similar to wheelchair basketball, with the most severely disabled athlete being graded at 0.5 points rising to 3.5 points. Each team has 4 players and is allowed a maximum of 8 points on the court at any one time. List of Paralympic sports. A number of different sports have been part of the Paralympic program at one point or another. This color indicates a discontinued sport. List of Summer Paralympic Games.